In this tutorial, I want to talk about this Get UUID function, and more specifically, how the weird numbers generated by this Get UUID can help you create a really nice iPad FileMaker Go solution in the future. Hey, what is up everybody? Welcome to another FileMaker beginner tutorial. My name is Sunny Chu, and today we are going to talk about this weird thing that's called Get UUID. So the inspiration of this tutorial is actually from an email of one of the students inside my DIY Automator course, and he asks me something like this. So basically, he has been a user of FileMaker for a few years now, and he has FileMaker 15, 16, 17, and 18. And the question that he has is that between FileMaker 16 and 17, FileMaker, the company, actually added a new feature in FileMaker. So when you create a new table, they create some default fields for you. And inside the primary key, if you click into it and have a look into the calculation value, it's actually using Get UUID as the primary key. And he wants to understand why FileMaker would recommend using Get UUID as the primary key instead of using like the standard serial number like 0001 or 002, etc, etc. And so in this tutorial, I want to attempt to explain to you what's the use of this really weird number and how you can apply it in the future, and how in a certain situation, like in an iPad situation, this might be a good option for you to use Get UUID instead of the serial number. So let's get into our PowerPoint. So the topic is, what is Get UUID and why is it useful? And just a very quick warning, if you do not have any sort of understanding of what relational database is and how relationship works, this tutorial will likely not make any sense to you at all. This is a tutorial that is targeted for people who already have like a basic understanding of relationship. And so if you don't know that yet, just make sure to check out my other tutorial, which is called Relationship Explained, and it's free, it's in YouTube, and you can check it out, and I'm going to put it in the link below. So let's get into the tutorial. So basically, in previous tutorial, when we talk about relationship, where we have like parent records and child record, if we want to establish some kind of sort of a relationship between these records, we will need to have something that's called a primary key. It's basically a unique identifier of these records. And if I want to set this parent to be related to these three child, I will need some sort of way for me to connect these relationships using the primary key on the parent side. So like 1 here, and these are all 1, indicating that these are the child of this parent. Now, in this case, this is the primary key, which is kind of like a unique identifier of this parent record. And this is the foreign key. Now, one of the very important concepts is that we want to have the value of this primary key to be a unique value. Because if this parent is also number 1, then we are going to have like a clashing data. So we want to make sure that our primary key is always unique. And there's a few ways that we can do it. Now, there are 2 ways that I can think of right now. And basically, the first way is the very standard way, which is going to be serial number. Now, if you use a serial number method, it's actually super simple. It's basically like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on and so forth. And the way that this works is that we are using an incrementing value. So we make sure that we are always going to have a new unique value in the next increment. And on the other side, we have Get UUID, which is what we are going to talk about today. Now, the weird thing about Get UUID is that it doesn't generate these very clean, easy looking numbers. It generates these very weirdly, well, non-human numbers that I don't think anyone can understand. But it's very important to note that in some situation, in a certain circumstances, using this Get UUID will have much better result than using the standard serial number. And today I want to explain that specific situation. And so let's go into our next slide. So basically, when you're working on like a server solution, so you have a FileMaker server and then you have maybe like 2 iPads that are trying to connect to this server, Now, usually you will put your .fmp12 file, the FileMaker file, inside this server. So when this iPad wants to create a record, it's going to say something like, hey, I'm about to create a new record. So what is the next serial that I should be using? And then the server is going to tell you something maybe like this, 001. And then so once you get this number, this iPad is going to create a new record that is 001. And for example, if this iPad also wants to create a new record, he's going to ask the server again, what is the next serial number? And then the server is going to tell him, well, the last one is 001, so this time it's going to be 002. And he is going to create a new record, which is 002 in here. Now, using this method, they're going to keep creating new record like 003, 004, and 005, etc., etc. So basically, using this method, we will be able to kind of like distribute these unique serial number to different iPads so that they don't create like clashing primary keys. Basically, this FileMaker file, it's kind of like a centralized serial number keeper. It's kind of like a bookkeeper that keeps tracks of all these numbers. Now, in the normal circumstances, this will work really well, this setup. But there's one really big problem that a lot of iPad solution or FileMaker is going to face, is that you're not always going to have the best Wi-Fi when you're using iPad. So basically, in situation like, for example, like doing outdoor work, for example, maybe you are like working on like a trucker app, so people drive around and have the iPad show them information, or maybe you're just like a mobile salesperson who needs to go out to other people's office and show them information on an iPad. Sometimes you might not have the best Wi-Fi connection to really get connection to the server. So what usually will happen is that FileMaker developer will try to develop something that we call an offline syncing mechanics. Now, of course, I don't know the official name for it, but basically this is what we are building. So basically, instead of just the server having a file, we're going to have a file for each of the iPad that we have right here, and also the server as well. And they're each going to keep their own separate offline records in here. So for example, if this iPad is going to create 2 records, he's just going to do his own thing. And then this iPad might also create his own record, and he's also going to be just doing his own thing. But when the time comes when this iPad is back to the office and he got a proper Wi-Fi connection, he might be able to click a button that's like sync, and then take this data, and then send it back to the server. Same goes with this guy, sync, send data, and back to the server. So using this method, we can kind of like solve the problem of not having a good Wi-Fi with connection, because basically we're only syncing when we have the proper Wi-Fi connection. Now, of course, this is a very advanced technique, and it takes a lot of experience to work on it. But what I'm trying to get to is that if we are working on like an offline sync environment like this, using the normal serial number is going to generate a lot of problem, and I'm going to explain why. So back to the starting point. Now, let's say this iPad wants to create a new record, and he's going to ask about what is the next serial number. Now, because he doesn't have direct access to the server, all he can ask is only his own local file. So this file is going to tell him like 001, and it's going to create a new 001 record. Now, when he's going to create a new record again, this file is going to tell him 002, and then he's going to create a 002 record. Now, it's very important to know that they do not have any sort of Wi-Fi connection between the 3 of them. So on this side, the second iPad, he's going to do the same thing. He's going to ask his local file, what's the number, and it's going to tell him 001, and 002, and 003, and so on and so forth, because, well, they don't have connection, so this iPad can only ask this file. Now, the problem will come when you try to sync the data back to a centralized place. So basically, if I try to sync these information back to the server, and this guy also try to sync the information back to the server, we're going to have a problem, because this 001 and this 001 is the same exact value. So the primary key is no longer unique, and we kind of have like a clash of data, which is going to break your database basically. So this is the problem that is going to arise if we're using a serial number method for us to generate unique primary key. And I just want to show you how this is going to be put into action in like a real life setting. So let's get back into our desktop and let's work on some database. And we are back to the desktop. So let me just quickly close this file for just a minute, and this as well. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to be working on this sample file for this tutorial. And I think the first thing I want to do is I want to explain to you what's inside this sample file. So if I go to File, Manage, Database, this is a very simple database with two tables, people and log. So basically, each person, it's going to have multiple logs inside it. Now, what I want to do first before I do anything to this file is to just duplicate another copy of it. So let me just quickly Control-C and then Control-V to generate another copy here, sample file. Well, I'm going to name this sample file number 1, and the other one I'm going to name it sample file number 2. Now, what I'm going to do in this file is that when I create a new record here, it's going to give me a serial number for the ID automatically, and then I can type in the person's name and I can type in some records in here. Sunny Chu, and Sunny Chu's first record, and then I'm going to type in maybe like Sunny's second record, something like this. Sunny test record number 3. So I'm just going to create 3 records. Test record 3. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open another one of this file, sample file number 2, and I am going to just quickly kind of like modify this layout a little bit so that we have a better understanding of which one is which. So this is going to use an orange color here, and the text maybe like maybe that's too light, and we can do something like this. Yeah, this is good. So these are 2 separate files. It's very important to know that. And what I'm going to do with these 2 files is that I am going to imitate to you exactly what I'm explaining in here. So basically this is file number 1, this is file number 2. Now on this side of the iPad I have a 001 Sunny, but if we are using a serial number here, and when I create a new record on this side as well, and let's say Tom's record like this, not Tom's record 1, Tom's record number 2, and then maybe I'm going to create another person here that's called Mary, and then Mary number 1. I'm just going to keep this very simple and primitive, the data. It's just for like samples. So on this side I have 1 record of Sunny. Now on the other side I have 2 records of Tom and Mary. Because I'm using the serial number as the primary key to connect all of these things. So if we go to the log, you will notice that I currently have 3 logs and they are all using the Sunny as the foreign key, 001 as the foreign key that connects to the people. Now on this side, I have a little bit more data. So I have 2 records for Tom. They're using 001 for Tom. And then Mary in here is using 002. Now what I'm going to do now is I want to try to import the data from iPad number 1 all the way to an iPad number 2 and show you exactly what I mean. So if I go to sample file number 2 and I'm going to use the import script that I've built in beforehand, and it's going to quickly ask me which file do I want to import from, and I want to import from the file number 1, and I'm going to take the people's data and duplicate it to the other side. Click OK, click OK, and then it's also going to ask me again. And this time I'm going to duplicate the log record to the log record of the other table. So click OK, and so now I have successfully duplicated the record to the other side. And let me just have a look at the data. So now you will notice that Tom is here, Mary is here, and also Sunny is here. But the weird thing is when you look into Sunny's record, you will notice Tom's record is also inside it, like this. So basically, because they are sharing the same foreign key for these records, they are both 001. They are now showing on, all 5 records, regardless of who it actually belong to, is showing on Sunny's record. Same thing, on the other side, we have Tom's record here, and Tom is also showing Sunny's record on this side. So this is actually not what we want, and that's exactly the problem with using a serial number as like a method to sync between multiple devices that doesn't have connection together is that in this case, we kind of have this situation where 001 here is Tom and 001 here is Sunny. Now, although they are different person, but because they share the same primary key, it kind of clashed and make the data kind of like problematic in this case. And if we look into the raw data just a little bit more, log here, and I'm going to show all records here, you will notice that, well, all of this record, Tom's record is using 001, 001, and Sunny's record is also using 001. So it links directly to the same, well, to Tom in here. But in reality, these 5 records in here is linked to both Tom and Sunny. So this is where the problem comes in. And so basically, what we want to do is we want to use Get UUID in this specific situation. And I think first, I want to explain to you what is Get UUID. So if I go here and open up my untitled file, it's going to be my testing file. And what I have in here is I've set up a field here, and when I click Get UUID, it's going to give me this weird number. So basically, in definition, Get UUID, it's basically like universal unique identifier. So basically, it's something I think it's created by Microsoft. I don't exactly know the history, but basically Get UUID is something like it takes your computer's MAC address and then kind of combine it with date and time when you trigger this script, and then it gives you a very unique value that looks like something like this. And there's like 32 characters in here in total, excluding the dash. And it can be like an alphabet, or it can also be a number. So it's together, the combination can be really huge. So in a lot of sense, practically, this is almost always going to give you a unique number, and it doesn't matter which computer you're triggering this on or on what time, and they don't need a certain connection. They will just create a very unique value in here for you to use as primary key. So basically, if I go back to my slide, this Get UUID thing, it's kind of like a very, it's like a very technical way of generating a very unique value using like the smallest digit inside your computer electron. It's like very deep science. I don't understand it fully, but basically it's going to generate a unique value. So how does this apply to our situation? So basically, we are back to this server and iPad settings thing again. Now, what we're going to have is when this iPad wants to create a new record, he's going to ask, hey, can I have a unique value? And his own file, it's going to say Get UUID here. And he's going to end up having something that looks like this. Now, of course, I shortened the number just to make it easier on the eyes. And when he wants to create a second record, it's also going to say Get UUID, and it's going to generate him another random number. Now, on the same side in here, this iPad is going to say Get UUID as well, do his own thing, and then do it a few more times to generate unique record in here, so that when they both sync back to the server, it doesn't matter if they don't have like a centralized person to keep track of the serial number. This UUID is always going to give you a unique number to use as a primary key. So when you sync it back to the server, it's going to be perfect. So I am just going to quickly put that into action inside our file here. So what I'm going to do is let me just delete this sample file number 1. And the next thing I want to do is probably to reset this file first, this original file. Now, I want to go to File, Manage, Database, and I'm going to change the way how this primary key of people is going to work. So double click onto it, uncheck the serial number, and I'm going to use a calculation value. And I'm going to use, well, for some reason it's already inside there, but I'm going to use this Get UUID function. Click OK, and make sure that not to replace existing value of the field as well. That being checked, click OK, and now let's quickly just test our record. And I think before we do that, let's just close this and duplicate another file. So we have a second file to work on. So this is sample file number 2 again. And I'm just going to open well, click away this one. I'm going to open both of them here like this, and again I'm going to change the color of the background as well as the text so that you know which one's which. Now let's do the same thing again. So let's create a new record, Command N for new record. Now right off the bat you will notice that the ID is looking very messy, but that's okay, we are just using this for demonstration. So Sunny number 1, Sunny number 2, I'm just going to keep things simple for this time, number 3. Now on the other side we're going to do the same thing. We're going to create a record for Tom, Tom's log number 1, Tom's log number 2, and Tom's log number 3 like this. And I'm also going to create one for Mary as well. So Mary number 1, and let's just create 2 for her. Mary number 2, very simple. So I have Tom and Mary on this side, just Sunny on this side. And I'm going to import this file into iPad number 2 again. So I'm just going to go to script and use my default import script. Now if you want to learn how to create this simple script, just go inside the script workspace and you can kind of see what I'm doing here. And so let's import this, and I'm going to select sample file number 1 to import the people's record. Click OK. And then I'm also going to select sample file number 1 to import the log record. Now this script is not too optimized, but basically that's not the point in this tutorial. Basically I want to focus on the Get UUID. So now we have the data imported from iPad number 1 to iPad number 2. So if I press Command J to show all record, all 3 of them, and I scroll through them, it's going to work perfectly, and it doesn't matter if we don't have like a centralized serial number keeper, because this Get UUID is always going to be a unique value. And if we go into the log and have a look at the raw data behind the scene, Tom's record number 1, 2, 3, it's all going to be linked to this specific Get UUID, which belongs to Tom. And Sunny's record 1, 2, 3, it's going to belong to this Get UUID, which belongs to Sunny. So I think that's basically it for the main part of this tutorial. Now, although in a more practical sense, this Get UUID can create some problem, because it's not a very good ID to look at for the human eyes, because who can make sense of this data? So usually what I would do is I'm probably going to just remove this in a real-life database solution. And then depending on the context, I am going to just leave a name here. So when I create a new record, it's very intuitive. So let's do Timmy here, and then Timmy number 1, and then everything is just very intuitive. And to be very honest with you, most of the case, the user doesn't really need to see the primary key. But of course, in some situation, for example, if you're creating a sales record, then you might need to have some sort of sales reference number for the customer to refer to a specific sales to you. But I think that's another question for another time to be answered. So that's basically it for this tutorial, and I hope you enjoy, and I will see you in the next tutorial.